Number 1 Chapter 1, Rubbish Technique. AI Model, Gemini 2.5 Flash. At the back mountain of the Taishuan sect, in a secluded spot, green trees provided shade, flowers bloomed like brocade, and birds and insects sang. Beside a gravel path, there was a large rock taller than a man. On the rock, a young man in a white robe sat cross-legged, cultivating. Spiritual energy rippled around the young man. With each breath, the converging spiritual energy expanded and contracted, following a mysterious rhythm as it gathered towards the young man's dantian. The young man's name was Ji Yufei, a disciple of the younger generation in the Taishuan sect. The Taishuan sect was one of the 3 great Taoist sects on the Tenglong continent, boasting a long history and being an ancient sect. Ji Yufei was an orphan. When he was 8, his master, Wan Shancheng, brought him back to the Taishuan sect as an inner disciple during his travels. Although he was in a Taoist sect, Ji Yufei did not cultivate Taoist techniques. Instead, he practiced a technique called the ancient body refinement technique. Body refinement technique, as the name suggests, is a technique that takes one's own body as the foundation to cultivate against the heavens. The martial skills and divine abilities described in the technique are enough to achieve sainthood through the physical body, and the ancient combat techniques can slay immortals and gods. However, once this ancient secret technique is cultivated, it is incredibly difficult. Even if one doesn't achieve success, they can no longer switch to cultivating other techniques. Ji Yufei, sitting cross-legged on the rock with his eyes closed, circulated the ancient body refinement technique, absorbing the spiritual energy from all directions into his dantian and accumulating it. When the spiritual energy in his dantian was compressed and accumulated to a certain degree, he guided it to shock the meridians in his body. Waves of spiritual energy converged. Whether it was the essence of the surrounding plants and trees or the essence of the sun and moon floating in the void, Ji Yufei refused none, absorbing them into his dantian like a vast ocean accepting all rivers. Faintly, tiny streams of light, thin as silk, could be seen swirling around him. As time passed, 7-colored radiance began to burst forth from Ji Yufei's dantian. This was the spiritual radiance emitted by highly condensed spiritual energy. Gathering chi, charging, gathering chi, charging. Spiritual energy fluctuations, sometimes strong, sometimes weak, spread from within Ji Yufei's body. In this cycle, streams of 7-colored spiritual essence, like a river breaking its banks, charged at the unblocked meridians within his body. Each impact felt as if a 1,000-pound hammer was violently pounding inside Ji Yufei's body. With every impact, a trace of pain appeared on his face. The powerful spiritual energy washing through the meridians brought a tearing pain. The spiritual energy bursting from the dantian was extremely violent, making it feel as if countless sharp small knives were cutting through his meridians. He clenched his teeth tightly, drenched in sweat. Tufts of hair were stuck to his face by sweat, and his white robe was soaked through, clinging to his body. He was undergoing the second threshold of the ancient body refinement technique, unblocking meridians. Unblocking meridians means gathering the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, condensing it in the dantian, and then charging the acupoints on the meridians to make them unobstructed. This way, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth can flow along the entire body's meridians, reaching every inch of muscle and every piece of bone, thereby achieving the purpose of refining tendons, bones, flesh, and blood, and causing the body to sublimate and transform. The ancient body refinement technique is a technique for cultivating the body against the heavens. Without an unyielding will like a rock and relentless arduous cultivation, one cannot even cross the first threshold of gathering chi. There are countless cultivation systems on the Tenglong continent, but the realms of cultivators can be divided into 5 major stages: awakening, transcendent, imperial void, demigod, and saint entry. Each realm is further divided into 9 heavens, corresponding to the meaning of the 9-5 supremacy. The ancient body refinement technique has 4 stages in the awakening realm. The first step to entry is gathering chi. Only by mastering the ability to gather chi can Ji Yufei proceed to the next stage of cultivation, unblocking meridians. After unblocking meridians comes tendon transformation. After achieving great success in tendon transformation, one enters the cultivation of bone forging. The day bone forging reaches completion is the time of the body's transformation. If the transformation is successful, Ji Yufei can break through the shackles of cultivation and advance to the transcendent realm. The gathered spiritual energy is still not strong enough. Repeated failures brought terrifying pain, like death by 1,000 cuts. Ji Yufei's lips were bitten until they bled, but he still persevered. There are 12 main meridians in the human body, and I've only unblocked 2. Besides the 12 main meridians, there are also the 8 extraordinary meridians. When will I be able to unblock all the meridians in my body and enter the tendon transformation stage? The difficulty of cultivating the ancient body refinement technique was truly terrifying. Most people who cultivated this technique, which had a formidable name but progressed incredibly slowly, seemed to have only one outcome: they died of old age before achieving success with the ancient body refinement technique. The sun was high in the sky. It was clear that the morning cultivation time was about to end. Ji Yufei had been sitting still all morning. Since unblocking the second meridian 2 years ago, he had made no progress. The cultivation barrier was like an insurmountable chasm, stretching before him. Ji Yufei was a little disappointed, but not discouraged. His personality was somewhat like his master, Wan Shancheng. Both were stubborn as oxen, the kind of people who never gave up despite setbacks. I'll risk it. Ji Yufei looked up at the sky. There was still enough time for one more attempt to charge an acupoint. So, he gritted his teeth, a look of determination appearing on his face, his gaze incredibly firm. Circulating the technique, the spiritual energy around him that hadn't yet dispersed converged again. In his dantian, a ball of spiritual energy slowly rotated, absorbing the spiritual energy gathering from all directions. A not weak fluctuation of vital energy emanated from within him. Various colored starlight appeared in his dantian. This was highly compressed spiritual energy of heaven and earth, power that had not undergone any transformation. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth rapidly gathered in Ji Yufei's dantian. Only when Ji Yufei felt a swelling pain in his dantian did he fiercely steel his resolve and desperately push the highly compressed spiritual energy within his dantian towards the third meridian of the 12 main meridians. Powerful, explosive spiritual energy surged rapidly through Ji Yufei's meridian, like a small stream suddenly flooded by a monstrous torrent. Wherever the spiritual energy passed, the meridian rapidly expanded, almost bursting from the force of the flood. Boom! A sound like a clap of thunder seemed to ring in Ji Yufei's ears. The torrent surging from his dantian violently struck the barrier of the meridian. Ji Yufei's body shook violently. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. His body swayed, and he actually fell headfirst from the rock. Below the giant rock, in the grass, Ji Yufei lay on his back, facing the sky. A trail of crimson at the corner of his mouth was particularly striking. He looked up at the sky, seeing through the gaps in the leaves the wisps of clouds drifting leisurely in the sky. Occasionally, a few spiritual birds flew past overhead. There was no discouragement or dejection in his eyes, only a gaze that was terrifyingly firm. Slowly getting up from the ground, he wiped away the blood stain from his mouth and looked towards the front mountain. On the mountain path at the back mountain, there were already scattered figures heading towards the front mountain. These were Taishuan sect disciples who, like him, had come to the back mountain early to cultivate. Taishuan mountain was towering and reached into the clouds. Cloud and mist swirled around the summit. Palaces and halls were faintly visible on the mountain. Its terrain was magnificent, making it a rare spiritual mountain and sacred ground on the continent. High-level cultivators practiced on the mountain, while young disciples like Ji Yufei, who had been initiated for less than 10 years and had low cultivation, could only cultivate at the foot of the mountain. Still no breakthrough. Ji Yufei inwardly examined his physical condition. He found that the barrier of the third meridian had only slightly loosened, it was still far from being broken through. 8 years, and the ancient body refinement technique has only reached the unblocking meridian's realm, just awakening stage 3rd heaven cultivation. Alas, Ji Yufei gave a self-mocking bitter smile. Disciples from other branches, even the lowest cultivated Wang Yuanji, have already reached the 5th heaven of the awakening realm. Thinking of Wang Yuanji, who often caused him trouble, a look of disgust appeared on Ji Yufei's face. Disciples from other branches cultivated Taoist techniques, and their progress was rapid, but the technique he cultivated progressed as slowly as a snail. In the cultivation world, only the strong are respected. If your cultivation is low, you are only a target for bullying. Ji Yufei tidied his clothes, then followed the mountain path, circling towards the front mountain. Unknown flowers bloomed on both sides of the quiet mountain path. The faint scent of grass and the subtle fragrance of flowers occasionally drifted into Ji Yufei's nose. Failing to break through the meridian barrier just now, Ji Yufei's body had suffered a considerable impact. Injury was inevitable. However, he didn't take the injury seriously at all, because after cultivating the ancient body refinement technique, while he didn't have other abilities, his body's self-healing ability was astonishing. When Ji Yufei arrived at the front mountain, he encountered more disciples, but none greeted him. It was as if they didn't see him, or they would give him a contemptuous glance and walk away. Ji Yufei was expressionless, his face calm. He treated the disdainful looks from some fellow disciples with indifference. Oh, isn't this our cultivation genius, Ji Yufei? Ah no, it should be cultivation trash, haha. Suddenly, a burst of unrestrained laughter came from ahead. On the path ahead, 3 young men, also wearing white robes and white belts around their waists, walked towards him. The one leading the way laughed loudly, while the 2 young men behind him also chuckled softly. Seeing these 3 young men, a trace of disgust flashed in Ji Yufei's eyes. Then, ignoring the 3 young men, he directly turned onto a side path. This side path led to a pine forest. Hey, Trash Junior brother, where are you rushing off to? The 3 young men also laughed and followed Ji Yufei onto the side path. There were 7 or 8 other young disciples on the path. However, when these disciples saw the 3 young men who were mocking Ji Yufei, their steps couldn't help but quicken slightly, as if they wanted to avoid the 3 young men. Who are you calling trash? Ji Yufei suddenly stopped, turned around, and roared at the 3 young men. This roar attracted the attention of other fellow disciples nearby. What's wrong with calling you trash? Not only are you trash, but your master is also trash, humph. What ancient body refinement technique, achieving sainthood through the physical body? It's just a piece of garbage technique, no one would pick it up even if it was thrown on the ground. Yet you 2 master and disciple treat trash as treasure, truly your heads were kicked by a donkey, utterly foolish. The leading young man was stunned by Ji Yufei's sudden roar, but immediately, like a rapid-fire cannon, he pointed at Ji Yufei's nose and cursed, spitting everywhere. Number 2 Chapter 2 Provocation. AI Model, Gemini 2.5 Flash. Oh, wow, the trash is getting angry. What, you want to hit me? Do you dare? Haha. Wang Yuanji, the leader of the group, glanced at Ji Yufei, who was clenching his fists, and walked up to him dismissively, puffing out his chest, looking like he was just asking for a beating. His provocative and arrogant words caused the other disciples walking along the path to frown. Wang Yuanji, at the 5th heaven of the awakening realm, was a disciple from the Wang family, a cultivation family in Qi state. Upon entering the sect, he spent a lot of time befriending fellow disciples. Relying on his family's background, he gradually became somewhat arrogant and overbearing among the lower-level disciples of the Taishuan sect. Most disciples from cultivation families suffer from a common flaw, youthful arrogance. This Wang Yuanji was precisely this kind of disciple. Ji Yufei stared intently at Wang Yuanji, his face filled with anger. However, his anger quickly subsided, and his tightly clenched fists relaxed. He longed to smash his fist into this hateful guy's face, making it a bloody mess with a gushing nosebleed. However, Ji Yufei knew that fighting Wang Yuanji now, he didn't have a sliver of a chance. Awakening 5th heaven against awakening 3rd heaven, the outcome was obvious. Ji Yufei forcibly suppressed the anger in his chest and chose to endure. He glanced at Wang Yuanji contemptuously, then turned and walked away, completely ignoring Wang Yuanji, whose face had turned ashen. He actually looked at me with that kind of look. Kid, you've got guts. Wang Yuanji was completely enraged by Ji Yufei's contemptuous glance. Senior brother Wang, why bother with such a good for nothing? Let's hurry to the Wallin Pavilion to get today's tasks, said a young disciple beside Wang Yuanji. Every sect has numerous affairs to handle, and the Taishuan sect is no exception. Disciples who have been in the sect for less than 10 years are required to take on miscellaneous tasks. Only the elite disciples of the sect can cultivate on the mountain without distractions and without doing any chores. The Taishuan sect opens its gates to recruit disciples from the secular world only once every 10 years. Before new disciples join, all miscellaneous tasks within the Taishuan sect are the responsibility of these disciples at the foot of the mountain. Alright, if I get a chance in the future, I'll definitely teach him a good lesson. He has no ability but acts so arrogant, he's truly asking for death. Wang Yuanji watched Ji Yufei disappear down the pine forest path ahead, a hint of viciousness flashing in his eyes. This guy was no good sort, he was someone who would seek revenge for the slightest grievance. Ji Yufei rounded a rock formation ahead, and the view suddenly opened up. At the end of the path, an elegant pavilion was nestled among the trees. This was the Wallin Pavilion. The Wallin Pavilion was where the Taishuan sect managed the sect's miscellaneous tasks, and it naturally managed the batch of young disciples who had joined for less than 10 years. When Ji Yufei arrived at the Wallin Pavilion, there were already quite a few young disciples in white robes entering and exiting the main gate. Without exception, the disciples coming out were all holding a jade token. Walking into the Wallin Pavilion, Ji Yufei looked up and saw a young girl with eyes like autumn water and cheeks like white jade walking towards him. Senior brother Ji Yu. The beautiful girl also saw Ji Yufei and immediately smiled and greeted him. Her voice was like the chirping of birds, clear and pleasant to the ear. This girl was also wearing a white robe, with a slender and graceful figure, appearing delicate and exquisite. Her black hair was draped over her shoulders, and her features were like a painting, a classical beauty. Junior sister Zhao. Ji Yufei nodded indifferently at the girl and walked forward. The two passed each other. Ji Yufei's nose caught a faint, yet elegant and pleasant, subtle bodily fragrance, which was intoxicating. The girl surnamed Zhao suddenly turned and looked at the lonely figure behind her. A few hints of sympathy appeared in her bright eyes, and then the girl turned and walked out of the Wallin Pavilion. Oh, isn't this junior sister Zhao? Vaguely, Ji Yufei heard Wang Yuanji's annoying voice coming from behind him. Ji Yufei glanced around the hall, seeing 7 or 8 young disciples in front of the jade wall ahead, taking down the palm-sized jade tokens hanging on it. The jade tokens were crystal clear, faintly emitting a layer of milky white light, definitely not ordinary objects. Beside the jade wall was a table, and behind it sat a middle-aged man wearing a green Taoist robe. This middle-aged man's eyes seemed to be perpetually closed. He was propping up his cheek with one hand and dozing. There was no Taoist hair crown on his head, his long hair was casually spread behind his head, a bit messy. His Taoist robe also seemed to have been haphazardly thrown on. This middle-aged Taoist priest gave the impression that he was perpetually half asleep. Laziness and sloppiness were both evident in him. The furnishings in the Wallin Pavilion Hall were simple, not luxurious but not vulgar either. Young disciples in white robes continuously walked in from outside and took down jade tokens from the jade wall opposite. The disciples who took down the jade tokens all scanned them with their divine sense, their faces showing either joy or worry. Ji Yufei arrived before the jade wall and saw that there were still 20 or 30 jade tokens left. He seemed to be among the earlier batch of disciples. Disciples who have been in the sect for less than 10 years are all 4th-generation disciples of the Taishuan sect. The Taishuan sect, one of the 3 major Taoist sects on the Soaring Dragon continent, only has 4 generations of disciples. The sect master's generation is naturally the first generation. Regardless of how many sect masters there have been, the sect master's generation is considered the first, and then it decreases layer by layer, stopping at the 4th. This was the hierarchical system of the Taishuan sect. Let's see what today's miscellaneous task is. Ji Yufei's face remained expressionless, it was difficult for others to discern any emotion on his face. Reaching out, before touching the jade token, his palm seemed to pass through a thin film, and a few faint ripples appeared in the space before the jade token. This was a restriction that isolated divine sense, preventing these young disciples from using their divine sense to probe the contents of the jade tokens. This was fair, like drawing lots, whether you got a good lot or a bad lot, you had nothing to say. On each jade token, there was corresponding information. Only when the jade token left the jade wall and was in the hands of the disciples could they probe the information within the token. Taking down a jade token, he scanned it with his divine sense, and a line of text appeared in Ji Yufei's mind. Today's task is quite easy. Ji Yufei showed no joy or sorrow, his face indifferent. The jade token showed that he had to go to the immortal herb valley 50 li away to collect 10 stalks of 100-year-old spirit pearl grass. The 10-year period is almost here. Is the sect going to open the furnace to refine the core condensing pill again? Ji Yufei weighed the jade token in his hand and turned to walk out of the pavilion. Just as he reached the doorway, he ran into Wang Yuanji and 2 other young disciples. Ji Yufei completely ignored Wang Yuanji's murderous gaze, not even sparing him a glance, and walked past him. This guy, Wang Yuanji was annoyed. However, he glanced inside at the dozing green-robed Taoist priest and forcibly suppressed the anger that was rushing up to his head. Inside the Wallin Pavilion, he couldn't act wild. Even if Wang Yuanji was extremely daring, he wouldn't dare to be presumptuous in front of this sloppy martial uncle. Leaving the Wallin Pavilion and walking past the pine forest path, Ji Yufei turned onto another gravel path. Ahead of this gravel path was a large area of buildings. This was the residence of the Taishuan sect's 4th-generation disciples. There were several such residences on the mountain. Of course, the female disciples' residence was not here, but on the other side of the mountain. He saw rows of buildings forming a crescent shape, enclosing a courtyard. In the courtyard was a large tree that several people could embrace. The tree's branches and leaves were lush, almost covering more than half of the courtyard. Ji Yufei walked into the courtyard and returned to his residence. After simply eating some fruit picked from the mountains, he changed his clothes and walked out of the building. Ji Yu trash, where are you rushing off to so quickly? A low voice came over as soon as Ji Yufei took his first step out of the building. The words were full of hostility, causing Ji Yufei to frown. He looked up in the direction of the voice and saw a young man with clear features but a strong killing intent between his brows, leaning against the large tree in the courtyard and looking at him maliciously. Beside this young man stood two other young disciples in white robes. Who else could they be but Wang Yuanji and his companions? Wang Yuanji, what do you want? Ji Yufei's expression turned cold, and he said in a deep voice. HMPH, I don't want anything much, I just want to take a look at the jade token in your hand. Wang Yuanji said slowly while walking towards Ji Yufei. The three young men subtly formed an encirclement around Ji Yufei, blocking him in front of his residence. Their contemptuous eyes and disdainful smiles greatly stimulated Ji Yufei's nerves. In Ji Yufei's mind, there was only one word, anger. Hashtag Chapter 3 Conflict. AI Model, Gemini 2.5 Flash. You want the jade token in my hand? Ji Yufei immediately understood Wang Yuanji's intention. This guy must have been assigned troublesome chores at Hualin Pavilion and didn't dare to target other disciples, so he found himself the one with the lowest cultivation among all his fellow disciples. At this moment, Wang Yuanji and the two youths had walked up to Ji Yufei. Hand it over. Wang Yuanji looked at Ji Yufei with a contemptuous, half-smiling expression, his tone filled with undeniable forcefulness, leaving no room for refusal. Wang Yuanji, a surge of anger rushed to his head. Even an earthworm, when stepped on, would wriggle a few times, let alone a human. Ji Yufei's anger had exceeded the limit of his endurance. Since taking a step back wouldn't lead to a wider sea and sky, then resist. When you can no longer bear it, there is no need to endure any longer. However, just as Ji Yufei was about to erupt, Wang Yuanji had already made his move. He saw his right hand lightly form a hand seal resembling a lotus flower, while at the same time, he softly uttered two words, suppress and seal. The two white-robed youths beside Wang Yuanji chuckled, waiting to watch the show. As soon as the hand seal appeared, Ji Yufei immediately felt his body tighten. The space around him suddenly changed, seeming to solidify. His entire body felt as if it were suddenly trapped and sealed, and he felt powerful forces squeezing in on him from all directions. A surge of magical power emanated from Wang Yuanji's body along with the hand seal in his right hand, stirring the spiritual energy of the surrounding world, instantly binding Ji Yufei. Ah! With a fierce roar, Ji Yufei's muscles and bones tensed up instantly. Veins popped out on his forehead as the power of his body erupted, resisting the sealing force squeezing in from all sides. Ji Yufei's muscles vibrated, and his bones shifted. Waves of pure physical strength contained within his flesh and blood emanated from his body, and his bones crackled under the pressure. The confrontation between physical strength and magical power caused visible ripples in the space in front of the house. Seeing that Ji Yufei could still struggle under his suppression, Wang Yuanji's expression immediately changed, and he was secretly startled. He was very surprised that Ji Yufei, whose cultivation was only at the third heaven of awakening myself, could actually shake the magical power of the suppression and seal he had activated. After all, his Wang Yuanji's cultivation was 2 whole heavens higher than Ji Yufei's. However, the look of surprise on Wang Yuanji's face was only fleeting. The difference in cultivation between the two was too great. Ji Yufei would definitely not be his opponent. The gap of 2 heavens was insurmountable. Although Ji Yufei shook the power of the seal, he could not break free from it. HMPH. A brute. This is the consequence of cultivating trashy cultivation techniques. Wang Yuanji and the other two youths sneered contemptuously when they saw Ji Yufei's desperate appearance. Wang Yuanji was even more smug. While holding the hand seal to trap Ji Yufei, he gestured to a youth beside him. The latter immediately understood, stepped forward, and reached into Ji Yufei's embrace. Ah! Ji Yufei roared in anger, fury churning in his chest. Desperately stimulating the power of his body made his eyes bloodshot, filled with streaks of red. What are you acting crazy for? The youth was not intimidated by Ji Yufei's aura. He directly took out the jade token, which was taken from the jade wall of Hualin Pavilion, from Ji Yufei's embrace. Senior brother Wang, catch. The youth turned around and threw the crystal clear jade token to Wang Yuanji. At this time, Wang Yuanji was holding the hand seal, using the Dao power he had cultivated to activate the Dao technique to suppress Ji Yufei. Seeing the jade token flying towards him, he naturally extended his left hand to catch it. As a result, while catching the jade token, his concentration was divided, and the power of the Dao technique immediately weakened. Wang Yuanji suddenly realized this and secretly cried out, not good. Just as he said that, with a soft, pung, sound, Ji Yufei desperately mobilized the power within his body. The power contained in his flesh, blood, and bones erupted like a volcano, instantly shattering the Dao technique, suppression and seal, that Wang Yuanji had imposed on him. At the same time, he unleashed a punch filled with raging anger. Bang! It fiercely struck the back of a youth who was facing away from him. The smile on that youth's still somewhat childish face instantly froze, and he was sent flying. Wang Yuanji was shocked and angry. His Dao technique was broken, and his mind instantly felt as if it had been struck by a 1,000-pound hammer. His face instantly turned pale, and his body swayed, actually taking a step back. Pung! The youth who was sent flying crashed heavily onto the bluestone floor in front of the house. The dust on the floor, as if whipped, billowed into the air. The sudden commotion made Wang Yuanji and the other youth look in astonishment at the trash in front of them, whose eyes were bloodshot, whose black hair was wildly disheveled, and who looked as if he had gone mad. The trash they spoke of seemed to have erupted in power. 2 terrifying rays of light shot out from Ji Yufei's eyes, staring at them, and his fierce gaze, like that of a ferocious beast, made their hearts tremble. Fear and anger were only momentary. A cultivating, trash, who was 2 whole heavens lower than him actually made him feel fear, an emotion that should not have appeared. This made Wang Yuanji very angry. Kid, you brought this upon yourself. Saying that, Wang Yuanji flashed and charged towards Ji Yufei. Go to hell, Ji Yufei roared, his expression somewhat manic. He directly threw a punch at Wang Yuanji. The powerful force caused a violent tremor in the air in front of his fist, producing a strong sonic boom. The powerful fist wind pushed forward, causing Wang Yuanji's long hair to fly back. Wang Yuanji felt a strong gust of wind in his face. This punch was not to be underestimated. This punch was definitely the strongest punch Ji Yufei had ever thrown in his life. Driven by anger, he unleashed the hidden power in his body. This power even exceeded the limit of his current physical strength. However, Wang Yuanji, who had instantly rushed in front of Ji Yufei, suddenly went, swish. And his figure split into 2. This was a low-level Dao technique for close combat, illusory shadow step. Ji Yufei, in his rage, was startled. The next moment, the punch he threw passed through Wang Yuanji's chest. His fist had no point of contact and completely struck the air. A feeling of frustration and wanting to vomit blood immediately surged into his heart, and Ji Yufei's face instantly turned deathly pale. The afterimage dissipated instantly. Ji Yufei cried out in his heart, not good. He exerted force on his feet and immediately wanted to rush forward with the powerful momentum of his forward punch. However, it was a little late at this point. Wang Yuanji's face, as gloomy as if it could drip water, had already appeared behind Ji Yufei. He smiled eerily without any hesitation, raised his right hand, and Dao power condensed in his palm, emitting a volatile fluctuation. 5 ding splitting mountain. The chilling words came from behind him, giving him a suffocating feeling. Ji Yufei felt as if his back had been violently struck by a giant mountain. His entire body involuntarily flew up and was thrown forward. With the forward momentum and Wang Yuanji's fierce strike, Ji Yufei was instantly sent flying like a cannonball. With a boom, he crashed into the trunk of the large tree in the middle of the courtyard, then bounced back, rolled onto the ground, opened his mouth, and spat out a mouthful of blood. The tree trunk shook, and several withered leaves drifted down from the tree. At this time, the youth who had been punched by Ji Yufei had already climbed up from the ground, a trace of blood on the corner of his mouth. However, when he saw Ji Yufei being sent flying and spitting blood, a panicked expression appeared on his face. The other youth also looked somewhat uneasy when he saw Ji Yufei spitting blood. Only Wang Yuanji walked forward with a cold smile, stepped on Ji Yufei's head, and looked down at Ji Yufei with cold eyes. Trash is trash. What can you do even if you get angry? Senior brother Wang, let's go. A youth glanced at Ji Yufei under Wang Yuanji's foot and said anxiously. Sparring among fellow disciples was not prohibited within the sect, but if someone was seriously injured by a heavy hand, it would be troublesome. After all, Ji Yufei had his master above him. Although his master was also considered trash among his fellow disciples of the same generation, his seniority was there. If they were held accountable, they would also be in trouble. What are you panicking about? Wang Yuanji said indifferently. Then, a divine sense infiltrated the jade token he had snatched from Ji Yufei. The next moment, he started to laugh. Gaga, Ji you trash, I didn't expect your luck to be so good. I'll enjoy your good luck for you. Saying that, Wang Yuanji moved his foot from Ji Yufei's head, reached into his embrace, took out his own jade token, and threw it onto Ji Yufei's body, while the jade token that originally belonged to Ji Yufei was put into his own embrace. Wang Yuanji glanced contemptuously at Ji Yufei, who was sprawled on the ground by him, then turned and left. The harsh sounds of laughter gradually faded into the distance. Ji Yufei lay under the big tree, almost grinding his teeth, filled with resentment, boundless resentment. Wang Yuanji, I will repay the humiliation of today tenfold, 100-fold in the future. Ji Yufei slowly sat up from the ground. Suddenly, with a ding sound, a jade token fell from his body. It's Wang Yuanji's jade token, but now, it's mine. The chores mentioned in the jade token must be completed. This is part of the sect's assessment. If they are not completed, there will be corresponding penalties. Among the young disciples, only the 10 most outstanding disciples who are in the top 10 in cultivation do not have to do miscellaneous chores in the sect. After all, such disciples are the key targets for cultivation in the sect and can be said to be the future hope of the sect. Grabbing the jade token and scanning it with his divine sense, Ji Yufei's face immediately changed. Azure Water Cold Pond. Wang Yuanji's task was to go to the Azure Water Cold Pond 100 miles away to hunt for 3-tailed azure phosphorus carp. Originally, it was Wang Yuanji's task, but now it has become his. How hateful. Ji Yufei fiercely punched the ground with a pung sound, and his fist sank into the soil. The Azure Water Cold Pond, although it was not a place of great danger, the water there was cold as ice all year round. Ordinary people did not dare to approach it, let alone go down into the pond to catch fish.